Before I get into the books of this video, I know I'm going to have a lot of comments asking what the hell happened to your voice. And no, I'm not ill, I just have very weak vocal cords that if I go to a bar with loud music and I have to speak loudly in order for people to hear me, I then lose my voice the next day. But I'm aware I haven't made a video in a while, so hopefully you can put up with a slightly croakier version of me. But that being said, I hope you guys all had an amazing August. I couldn't even tell you where my last month went. July seems to last forever, but August? Who is she? I don't know. I did not see her. But despite being busy, I still managed to read 6 books last month, so stick around as I tell you what they were, along with what they're about, what I rated them out of 5 stars, and what I liked and disliked about them. And if you're new here, hi, welcome. I'm Katerina. I make videos talking about books, and I'm sorry this is your first interaction of me with this horrible voice. But anyway, kicking off, the very first book I read last month was A Troubling Love by Elena Ferrante. I'm a huge Ferrante fan, and I read The Lost Daughter last month, which I really enjoyed, so I was on a bit of a Ferrante kick, and I then ended up picking up this book next. The premise of this book is a bit hard to describe on a whole, just because it's a bit weird. The story follows a middle-aged Italian woman who fled from Naples many years ago in order to break off from her separated parents. But at the very start of the novel, she finds out that her mother actually drowned under very suspicious circumstances. So she returns to her hometown in order to uncover the truth behind her death and work out who the culprit was. But in the process, she uncovers some quite troubling family secrets along with repressed childhood memories. And as much as I love this author and I've rated her other books very highly, I actually only rated this 2.5 stars, which honestly really pains me to do. This is actually the author's debut novel, and I won't lie, you can tell from the writing that this was definitely her first book. Starting off with things I liked, I honestly loved the fact that we have her classic signature style and themes of a complex but unhappy woman, usually with mummy issues and dealing with quite aggressive and oppressive Italian men whilst knocking around a very run-down Naples. There's a lot of exploration into childhood traumas and a woman's struggle under this patriarchal control around her. And it still managed to explore very dark and deep themes throughout the novel, which is one of the reasons I love this author's work, is her ability to not shy away from uncomfortable topics. We dive into it all, including female bodies, mother-daughter dynamics, male aggression, domestic abuse, as well as shame and obsession and longing. However, peace and love to the author, but like with Pancakes, the first attempt at creating something was a little bit of a hot mess. Apart from this woman running around Naples with her mum's dirty underwear in her handbag, I really couldn't tell you what else happened in this book. And I saw a lot of other people's reviews saying this, that the novel just didn't really make much sense. It was just a bit all over the shop, it was very unpolished and vague, and it therefore left me kind of distracted and bored whilst reading it. My mind would just often wander whilst reading it because there was nothing really keeping me engaged or hooked in the story for me to follow along. It kind of felt like a fever dream, like she was just doing really bizarre things with no coherent line of thought or action throughout. So you're really just following this Italian woman doing deranged things without really understanding her reasoning behind her actions. I honestly adore this author, and I have literally recommended every single book I've read of hers, but this one just wasn't for me, and I think if you're a Ferrante fan as well, I would definitely give this one a miss. For my next book, a lot of people were surprised to see me pick this up, but it's honestly been on my TBR list for honestly over a decade. So the second book I read last month was The Maze Runner by James Dashner, which is the first book out of, I believe, 5 in the series. In this story, we follow a teenage boy who one day wakes up with no memory of who he is or anything about his past. And he finds himself in a big group of other teenage boys who are all surrounded by this big, ever-changing maze. Some of them have been stuck there for years trying to figure a way out, and their escape is made harder by these deadly creatures that exist in the maze, therefore making their escape impossible. However, very soon after this boy arrives, a girl is then sent into the maze and basically all hell breaks loose. And despite the huge popularity around this series, I actually only rated this book 2 stars, which I got a lot of upset comments on my Instagram about, but I have my reasoning. Honestly, I really liked the idea of this book. I think the idea of being stuck in this ever-changing maze is a really cool idea. And I like this mishmash of all these different boys' personalities. It very much reminded me of Lord of the Flies, which I think that the author definitely took some inspiration from. And there were times in the plot where it felt like there were genuine cliffhangers that actually left me hooked and had me reading chapter after chapter. However, James Dashner better count his lucky stars that he wrote this when young adult dystopian fiction was having its heyday. Because I will die on the hill that if this book was written today, it would have genuinely been dragged through the dirt. Because the whole story is built on this plot device of just basically withholding information. The main character shows up and tries asking the boys other questions to understand like the environment he's in, but all the other boys are just like, whoa there, we can't tell you that yet, you're still new here. So we honestly just dick about for like 200 pages for no real reason. And he doesn't even get told in the end. His memory just conveniently drip feeds him information whenever he needs it. Which is honestly terrible writing, by the way, because I want this character to go on a journey in order to find out this information. Because it makes me as a reader feel like we're cracking this code together. It makes the whole reading experience fun. But if he just suddenly has a random flashback in order to advance the plot, it's just like, what's the fun in that? It just makes it so boring. The characters were also just really annoying and one-dimensional. I literally didn't care for any of them. One of them dies near the end and it's meant to be this really emotional moment, but like I literally just couldn't care. I was like, come on, can we just move on past this? Whilst reading it as well, I just feel like the author just didn't really get what teenage boys were like. At one point they make their own swear words and they just say shuck instead of, and it just was painful to read each time. So they'd call each other shuck face and shuck off, and I was like, oh guys, come on now. I wanted so badly to like this book, but I just didn't. And also, guess what? What am I meant to do with these? People have also told me that the series drops off after the second book, so I guess these are going back to the charity shop because I don't think I'll be reading the rest of these. After those two flops, I was really craving a good book, so I then read something that I heard a lot of people say was a really solid novel. So the third book I read last month was, I don't know if I can say this title in a YouTube video without getting demonetized, so I'll just leave the cover there for you to read, but it's The Virgin by Jeffrey Eugenides. This story is set in 1970s suburban Michigan, and it's told through the collective perspective of these teenage boys who are obsessed with these 5 beautiful sisters that live in their neighborhood. These girls are stunning, yet they're also quite depressing and have this mysterious allure to them that the boys are just entranced by. They're honestly just fascinated by these girls, which to be honest, so was I by the end. And the novel is basically them recounting these girls' lives and trying to piece together the memories and clues of the circumstances of why they unalived themselves. And given that premise, I know this is really weird to say, but I really enjoyed this book and I gave it 4 stars. It's getting to a point now where I'm quite concerned for my taste in reading because why do I only like really messed up books? I don't know. Don't want to look into that. I read a lot of negative reviews on this book saying that it romanticized trauma and it was gross for the author to sexualize the girls in this way. But honestly, I think any review saying this genuinely missed the whole point of the book. It's written from the perspective of the boys for a reason. In my opinion, this is a story which clearly shows the dangers of the male gaze. It's so clear that these girls were under the control of very abusive parents, but the boys just completely looked past this. They idolized these girls, they dreamed about them and fantasized spending their time with them. They basically seemed to be in love with them, but they didn't know anything about them and did nothing when the girls needed their help. Because, you know, they're just boys. How are they meant to know better? And honestly, the pros of them being older and reflecting back on this was such a clever writing device because it felt very haunting and hazy and dreamlike. Like they're so traumatized from their deaths that they're still in this young, naive mindset that comes with adolescence. Because despite this novel being about the girls, they're somehow still decentered in their own story because it mainly focuses about what these guys think about them. I was also super impressed with the use of this first-person plural narrative. I think it was done really well. To constantly be writing we instead of I throughout without it feeling unnatural is honestly remarkable. I recently read Brutes by Tate that also tried doing this, but that book was a clear example of how not to do it because it was absolutely awful. But here the prose was so smooth and the writing was so good. Like you could literally tell that the author crafted every single sentence so carefully. It weirdly felt whimsical despite its themes, and it honestly read more like poetry than a novel. I think my only reasoning for not giving this 5 stars is that it just felt weirdly unrealistic that no other adult got involved with what was happening with the girls. Surely the boys' parents knew, or like other teachers in the school must have known because they were pulled out of school. But maybe this is a critique on suburban America where everything was swept under the rug to look perfect. Who knows? It was the 70s after all. I also just kind of felt like the same themes were repeated again and again throughout the novel cycle without not really many new themes being introduced, so it kind of felt a little bit repetitive by the end. But overall, fantastic novel. I really enjoyed it, and I really want to watch the film adaptation that Sofia Coppola did. I've actually been meaning to watch that film for years, but I wanted to read the book first. I'm so glad that I finally read it so I can actually enjoy the film. But honestly, I'm just glad that I read a good book, because I feel like I've been reading so many flops lately that it was just nice to finally pick up an interesting book for once. Although saying that, I did enjoy the fourth book I read last month, which was Luster by Raven Leilani. So this novel follows a young black woman who I believe is in her early 20s, and she's living in New York, and she's essentially navigating the messiness of modern life. She's lost both of her parents, she's in a job that she hates, and she ends up becoming entangled with a middle-aged white man in an open marriage. You know, the classic behaviour that you get up to in your early 20s. She ends up meeting his wife and gets invited to stay in their house, where she also meets the couple's adopted black daughter. And she essentially forms her own unique dynamic with this girl, which is heavily influenced by their similarities in their race and power dynamics. And like I said, I did also enjoy this book, and I rated it 3.5 stars. It was a little strange to read, but it was still quite fun. The main character here is a woman that you're not really meant to like, just because she makes so many terrible decisions. But you end up feeling sorry for her because of the unfortunate hand that life has dealt her. So there was so many times in the book where I just didn't know whether to shout at her or hug her, to be honest. Because I get it, I've been through that age, and you don't always think things through before you do very questionable actions. And the story is really a deep dive into relationships and how messy and complicated they can end up being. Yes, this couple is having an open marriage, but it's not always black and white, and people don't always truly tell their intentions from the start. And despite the story being narrated by this young woman, I would honestly say that there are four main characters in this book, including the couple and the adopted daughter, because we all see their different struggles, and it's interesting to see each person's take on the same situation. There was also just some really interesting themes explored here, such as racial and power imbalances, human connection, and figuring out one's identity. I also just enjoyed reading the perspective of a main character who was observant and emotionally intelligent. You honestly feel that exhaustion of someone who is so switched on all the time and very much aware of what the things that they're doing are not good. The reason I didn't rate this novel any higher than 3.5 is because I felt like it lost steam halfway through. I was so invested in the first half. The plot was exciting and the commentary was fascinating, and I was honestly gripped on what was going to be happening next. But then the second half just kind of fell a bit flat. She basically stays in this couple's house and just outstays her welcome. And I honestly thought there was going to be more of a complex relationship between the main character and this young girl, or even for the book to have a little bit more of an interesting ending, but I was just kind of let down by the end, which is a shame because I honestly think if the second half was as exciting as the first, I would have given this 4 or 4.5 stars easily. But the second half wasn't really that interesting and became a little repetitive, so I think 3.5 is a fair enough rating for this book. Moving on, as summer is ending, which I made a whole video about of my TBR list, which I'll link down below if you want to watch. One of the books I mentioned I wanted to read soon is Outline by Rachel Cusk, so I ended up reading that next. This novel follows a British middle-aged woman who moves to Athens in Greece in order to teach a summer writing course. And honestly, there's no real plot here. The book is just a series of back-to-back conversations that this main character has with the people around her. From the stranger she sits next to on the plane, to her colleagues and students, and just people she meets whilst in Greece. She's more of a listener than a talker, so we hear the various stories from these other characters, mainly regarding their regret and guilt in life. And I rated this book 3 stars, which I thought it was okay, but I think I just expected a little bit more from it. Starting off with things I liked, I did enjoy these conversations on how it explored different relationships and circumstances that people can go through throughout their life. We hear stories from such a wide array of people, and it really made me think about this concept of sonder, which is this profound realization that the strangers you pass have as complex life as your own, despite your lack of awareness of it. I live in London, so I pass a lot of strangers every day, and it sometimes gets to a point where I literally just kind of see them as NPCs. But this book really explored some deep topics of love and grief and parenthood and existentialism and so many of these other thoughts that I genuinely think about all the time. And it was really comforting to see glimpses of myself in these other stranger stories and how we're all more alike than each other than we think. When I was reading this book on the tube, I actually just had a moment of just thinking, you know, this story that I'm reading could literally be the person's reality who's sitting opposite me. You never know what someone's going through in life. The book just also has some beautiful one-liners and very strong words of wisdom throughout, which I very much enjoyed. However, this book is literally the definition of no plot, just vibes. This woman literally does nothing apart from fly to Greece and just listen to strangers talk. We have pages and pages and pages of just one person talking, and I did find myself wandering off at times and just getting a little bit bored, especially because these are just conversations about everyday human dynamics and just the frustrations of mundane life. So they weren't necessarily talking about anything gripping that had me on the edge of my seat, so I found the content a little lacking at times. I also wanted to hear more from the main character. I get that she was a listener rather than a talker in the story, but I didn't really know anything about her by the end of the book, apart from that she was divorced and had 2 kids. I get that the point of this book was that you're not really meant to know anything about the main character. You're meant to just kind of imagine yourself there and listen to these people's stories. But I don't know. I think I'm too much of a yapper to just listen to someone talk for minutes on end. I like to ask questions and become more involved in what they're saying. Also, this book had my biggest pet peeve when it comes to literature, which is no speech marks. Why? Just put them in there. I want to know who and when someone is talking. So overall, this book was okay. It was interesting if you want like a bit more of a quieter read, but if you're more action driven and don't like the lack of speech marks, then I would not be in any rush to read it. And finally, the last book I read in August, which I'm glad this video is nearing to an end because my voice is really going, is Come Rain or Come Shine by Kazuo Ishiguro, which is part of the Faber Stories collection. This is a novella. It's super short. I think it's literally around 60 or 70 pages. And the story follows a man in his late 40s who, shall we say, has never really reached his full potential in life. He's one day invited to stay over with university friends at their house who are now married, but whilst he was studying, they were a couple. And he basically gets roped into the drama of their strained marriage. And the guy in this couple is basically asking for his help to convince his wife / other friend to stay with him. And I rated this book 4 stars, which I honestly wasn't expecting, but I was pleasantly surprised with this book. Firstly, this short story isn't the usual writing style of Kazuo Ishiguro. If you've read his other books, you'll know what I mean. His other works, like Remains of the Day and also Never Let Me Go, are a bit more slow and somber in their prose. I guess they're just more existential. But this was honestly not what I was expecting. It was very weird to the point where it was kind of ridiculous, but in a way that it was sort of funny. This is such a niche reference that maybe only my British viewers would get, but this honestly felt like an episode from Peep Show, but set like 20 years in the future. Because the 2 main men in this story are literally Jeremy and Mark. Like, they have literally one brain cell between them. On a whole, the situation just felt very absurd and pathetic, and to me, it felt very funny, but I don't know, maybe I've got an odd sense of humor, but I found it very weird. But I still also like that it had traces of the author's signature style in exploring heavy themes and the human condition. I feel like this one in particular explores nostalgia and the quiet disappointments in adulthood that can lead to loneliness and unrealized potential. I'm going to read you my favourite line, which basically sums up the whole novella. Then before you know it, you're 47 years old and the people you started out with have long ago been replaced by a generation who gossip about different things, take different drugs, and listen to different music. I feel like this would have been a better book to read when I was older, but to be honest, even in my late 20s, I really relate to this line because there are kids or teenagers now who are listening to music and saying different slang that I'm literally just like, yo, when did I get old? Because I don't know any of this. The only reason I didn't rate this 5 stars is because some of the things that these characters were doing were so ridiculous that it kind of came across as satirical. And I guess that the ending wasn't as satisfying as I wanted, but to be honest, it's hard to write a solid ending from a story that's this short. It was a fun and lighthearted read, and I read it in one sitting, so I can't complain. I enjoyed it. And there you have it. Those are all the books I read in August. In terms of my personal life last month, I was just pretty much out with friends in London every day. August for me kind of feels like the Sunday of summer. You know, everything is coming to an end and everyone's desperate to make the most of the little time that we have left. I personally tend to get the feeling of the Sunday scaries in August, especially because my work gets outrageously busy again in September. So this month I wanted to take more time for myself to enjoy the things I like to do with the people that I love and enjoy spending time with. I'm not going to specifically list everything that I did, but I just had so many various drinks and gatherings and birthdays that it was honestly just so much fun. And I just overall made the most of London during the final season of summer, which is my favourite favourite time of year in the city. Everyone's just in a better mood and up for doing fun things, so I was really just soaking the last of this energy in, especially before this country delves into its freezing and internal winter again. But overall, I had a really wholesome and fun month. Although it was a little tiring, as you can tell from my voice, it was definitely worth it. And honestly, this is probably a controversial opinion from someone like me whose whole channel is dedicated to books, but as much as I love reading, I do definitely prioritize living life and making memories with the people who I love. Because honestly, I think it's a good benchmark in order to review books because you're kind of comparing it on real life, if that makes any sense. I can make a whole video about my thoughts on this later because I'm sure this video is already getting too long, but yeah, I had fun last month. In terms of films I watched last month, the majority of these are really weird because they're mainly just films I watched with the people I was hanging out with. I saw the new Fantastic Four film, not just because of Pedro Pascal, but I had heard really good things about this, and honestly, it was a lot more enjoyable than I imagined. I also saw K-pop Demon Hunters, which is a fun animated film that lightly pokes fun at the K-pop industry, and honestly, it was genuinely excellent. I also just watched a few silly films, including Role Models and also the first Austin Powers film, don't ask why. I also saw Sorry Baby that I think has just come out, which was a little bit on the heavy side, but I would still recommend it. I would just say to check the trigger warnings first. I also watched the second season of the Dallas Cowboy Cheerleaders show. I find that TV show so interesting. Like, come on, it's really fit women dancing. How am I not gonna like that? I'm also on season 4 of Sex and the City, and it may just be one of the best TV shows ever made. I'm really enjoying it, and I'm sad that it's one day gonna come to an end. And there you have it. That was my August summed up in one video. Let me know in the comments what your August was like and also what your favourite books were from the past month. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like down below. It would mean the world to me, especially because my voice is going and I'm really struggling. And if you're new here, please subscribe. I make videos chatting all things books. Feel free to also follow me on my socials. I have a Goodreads where I update in real time what books I'm reading. And feel free to also follow me on my Instagram. I post personal things on there, but I also post the books that I've read, letting you know what they're about and what I rate them out of 10. I'm now going to have a big cup of tea to hopefully soothe whatever's going on with this, but hopefully in the next video I will be back to normal. As always, sending love to my good pretending subscribers who continually watch and support me. I love you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!